Hi, Byron.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm joining you today from Washington, Pennsylvania. It's south of Pittsburgh. I went to a Sarah Palin rally on Tuesday in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. And
I love Shippensburg. We used to go there annually. Long story. Go ahead.
Is that
Sorry.
a fact? Well, it was at Shippensburg University. Maybe you were going there.
I gave a talk there once.
Where they have, everyone has T-shirts that say, "Ship Happens." And that's a popular thing at Shippensburg University. Anyway, Palin filled up the big gymnasium there and is now moving over to Ohio and is going to be in... It's Chillicothe. It's not Chillicothe, right? Chillicothe, Ohio.
I know how to pronounce Ohio. I'm going to have to trust you for that.
That's
for that
good.
Other one.
That's good. So anyway, I'm just on the following Palin around beat right now.
You're not the only one. She draws a crowd. So, and the polls are allegedly tightening a little. And in fact, the Real Clear Politics index has gone, poll of polls has gone from kind of 7.8 to 6.3 as of this AM. And I'm sure the McCain camp is talking that up, right? There's momentum. Well,
they do. I mean, they've been talking the polls, the idea that the polls were tightening for quite a while, and yet they really haven't. I mean, the thing about these polls is that on any given day, first of all, this is an astonishingly overpolled race. I think you'd probably agree with that. You may have 10 new polls released in a day, and they may run the gamut from Obama leading by 1 or 2 to Obama leading by 12 or 14. So it's, I guess those are both outliers, and that the average could be accurate. I don't know. We'll find out. But we haven't seen this huge change. I will say, the interesting thing in Shippensburg, which is in south central Pennsylvania, was that there was among the people who came to this rally, there was still a lot of residual or remaining resentment about Obama's bitter clinging to guns remarks. They all make jokes about not being bitter, about not clinging to their religion. And I'll tell you, if I was a McCain strategist in Pennsylvania, I would make sure that every single person in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, I guess, heard the audio of Obama's bitter clinging remarks at least once an hour between now and Election Day.
So they are bitterly clinging to his remarks, even if they don't bitterly cling to their guns and religion. and McCain should exploit that.
They remain unhappy about that, and I think that would be a smart thing for because this is the area. I was here in this area whenever the Pennsylvania Democratic primary was, and talked to a lot of people who were kind of the same but Democrats who were going to Hillary Clinton rallies. In a number of these counties, I'm in western Pennsylvania now, a number of these counties went 65, some maybe even 70% for Hillary Clinton in a Democratic primary. And I have to say, at those rallies, at the Hillary rallies, I talked to a lot of people, and I would ask every one of them, if it turns out that Obama is the eventual nominee, would you vote for him? And about half of them said no. I mean, one fellow said he would move to Canada first. And, some of those people were probably, caught up in the emotions of the moment in this hot primary race. But my guess is that some of them really won't. So those are the people that McCain needs to exploit, if he can, in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, but unless the polls are way, way off, Pennsylvania is way, way off for McCain, right? I mean,
it's interesting. There's this big mystery about this because the polls show, 10, 11 points? I mean, a big lead. And yet McCain and Palin keep pushing hard in Pennsylvania. They were here the other day. I think Palin's going to be here again on Thursday, and I think they'll be here again before Election Day. So the mystery is, why is McCain pushing so hard on Pennsylvania if these polls are so terrible? And there's a couple of things. One, I guess he is afraid of losing some of the Bush states, 2004 states, that he would have to hold, and thinks he could compensate by Pennsylvania, or he doesn't believe the polls. He thinks that he is stronger in the central and western areas than the polls suggest, and that maybe he doesn't believe that that Obama would win by such a vast margin in the Philadelphia area as the polls suggest. So I think the only explanation is that McCain and his strategists simply do not believe those polls.
Or maybe they have a theory about why those polls are underrepresenting the people you just described or something. And of course, it does make Obama keep coming back to Pennsylvania and spending resources there. But still, I don't know. I mean, what's a guy going to do? Now, you, as far as the polls go, you have a theory about the Bradley effect?
Oh, well,
seems counterintuitive to me, but go ahead.
Well, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. It seems that, obviously, there's lots of talk about the Bradley effect. We don't know whether it will even exist, and if it does, how extensive it would be and where it might be. But it seems to me, let's say, imagine, in another universe, you were a staunch Republican, and that you voted for Bush in 2004 and 2000, and you
that is another universe, by the way.
And you voted. Well, that's why we're here. This is an intellectual exercise.
You set it up exactly right.
You voted for Dole in 1996. You voted for George H.W. Bush in 92 and 88, and then before that, in your first elections, you voted for Reagan in 80 and 84. Okay, you have a straight Republican voting record, and now in this election, you vote for John McCain. Now, are you not voting for Barack Obama because you have some racial motive or because you're a Republican? It seems to me that the only people who could be said to be swayed by a Bradley effect would be those people who might, under some circumstances, actually vote for Obama. So certainly any Democrat who votes for McCain could be under suspicion for the Bradley effect. And I suppose some independents who might be inclined to vote for Obama would also be that. But although there are a lot of independents who call themselves independents, but they consistently vote one way or the other. So it seems to me that if there is a Bradley effect, Republicans will be immune from any charges of racism, and B, it would affect only Democrats and some independents who might lean that way. And my question is, what do you think?
Well, I guess the reason I wouldn't think that there's going to be a Bradley effect emanating from the Democratic side is there wasn't much of one during the primaries, with the exception, I think, of some of the states in the South, which don't really matter now anyway. And I forget what the I think I forget what the theory was about why it was that they found a little bit of one in the South. Now, it's also the case. And the other reason I would say I wouldn't think Democrats are going to be the likely source of it in states that matter is that the polls did overrepresent Obama's vote in New Hampshire, and that was a state in which independents voted. So if by and large you didn't see it in states where Democrats only voted in the Democratic primary, and you do see it in the occasional state where independents vote, I would just think, on empirical grounds, leave theory aside, that suggests that the Bradley effect is coming from someplace other than Democrats in the states that matter.
So your sense is that there really won't be a Bradley effect this time around?
Well, no. Well, first of all, I support Obama, and I'm a pessimist. So yes, I assume everything bad will happen, and I include the Bradley effect. It's just that my theory had been. In looking for something to be pessimistic, for grounds for pessimism, I had come up with the opposite theory of yours that, well, if the Bradley effect hasn't been coming from the Democratic side, it's got to come from independents or the Republican side. And I guess my main thinking was we don't have an empirical basis for knowing yet. Whereas we do have empirical grounds for largely dismissing a big Bradley effect on the Democratic side, except apparently in some southern states. But I'm far from convinced that we won't see it among Republicans and independents.
But you would concede that my hypothetical Republican with that voting record, and there are millions of them, really, it would be very hard to say that he or she was voting on racial grounds, given their voting record.
Well, I guess, I think the Bradley effect, I'm not sure I've wrapped my mind around your scenario, but it's not, it's it doesn't necessarily depend on a vote motivated by racism. All the Bradley effect depends on is that someone fear that if they say they're not voting for Obama, they will be seen as racist. So you could have the purest motivations and yet not want to be seen as a racist and thus contribute to the Bradley effect.
Okay. And the last thing was, you mentioned these states in the South. Hillary Clinton won Ohio and Pennsylvania fairly, decisively. But you believe that if there was a Bradley effect in the primaries, it was visible in some states in the South, but not in Ohio and Pennsylvania, where Hillary got the support of these so-called working-class whites?
There's an actual study I saw. I don't know if I'll be able to.
Don't inject your academics into this thing. Let's go on sheer intuition, please.
It was my web cruising. It wasn't my academics, believe me. But they actually did the study and found that was the only systematic area of Bradley effect, possible Bradley effect in the Democratic. And again, the key thing is Obama underperforming relative to polls, and that happened in New Hampshire. I didn't know that happened in Pennsylvania or Ohio. So,
all right. Well, anyway, here in Pennsylvania again, McCain should push bitter clinging, and a little Reverend Wright wouldn't hurt on McCain's part in this part of Pennsylvania as well. I think that that would be effective, but I'm not sure that he's doing any. Well, I know he's not doing the Reverend Wright thing, and he's not making enough use of the bitter clinging stuff here in Pennsylvania, which, if it's as important to McCain as his schedule indicates, he should be pushing on.
What is the harshest kind of advertising he's doing there? Either robocall or TV.
I should know that, but I actually don't. I can't say the harshest stuff. I think he was here yesterday making a lot of criticism of Obama's tax plan, which has basically been. He says it's $250,000, but don't believe him. He's coming after you, which I think is an entirely legitimate and I find persuasive.
Well, why is it legitimate if his tax plan actually only raises taxes for people over $250,000 income?
Well, it's not a matter of what he says. There have been. I don't want to break any news here, but there have been politicians who say one thing to get elected, and then when they're in office, they do something different. And
why wouldn't that apply to McCain just as much as... why shouldn't we suspect that either one of them will do any number of terrible things?
It certainly could apply, but I'm talking about what McCain should be saying right now, or what he is saying right now, and whether that's legitimate. And it's entirely legitimate to say, look, he says he's not going to raise taxes on any family making less than $250,000. He's going to lower taxes for 95% of American families. But don't believe him. He and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, they're going to come after you. They're going to take the definition of rich and they're going to reduce it till it gets to where you are, and he's going to raise your taxes. So that's an issue of trust, and I think it's perfectly legitimate for one candidate to raise about another.
Because after all, who is Barack Obama?
Well, I'll tell you something. I do think that there has been an amazing credulity on the part of some journalists and some fact-checking journalists to leave out the part of Obama says he will and just say Obama would, or this person's taxes would go down under an Obama administration, as if that were a fact. And I think we should all point out at all times that what Obama and McCain are saying are their campaign promises, and they are not statements of facts that will exist in the event of the election of Obama or McCain.
Yeah, strictly speaking, they should always say Obama's tax plan would or under Obama's tax plan. I agree. But more broadly, you think there is systematic media bias in favor of Obama?
Well, systematic? What does systematic mean?
Giant conspiracy of lefty cultural elites to suppress the worldview of Byron York?
There you go. Of course. No, in terms of systematic, I think that kind of presupposes this. We'll have the Obama bias meeting in the conference room at 9 a.m.
Oh, that reminds me. I got to run because it's at 9:30 today.
It doesn't work that way. But a couple of things. I think there are lots of examples. Well, first of all, let's start. I'm sure you saw the new Slate article And Slate is to be commended for actually sort of tackling this issue. And as in past elections,
I missed it actually. What is the thesis quickly?
Well, they publish how their staffers say they will vote.
They do that every time. And they're liberals on balance, yeah.
Well, I believe this time it turned out 55-1 for Obama.
Who is the one?
Actually, it was very interesting.
Find him.
I should. They published this all by name, and I apologize for getting it. I believe it was a woman, and she is in an editorial position. And unlike most of the others, she lives in Ohio, so she is not in the New York-Washington axis.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, of the 55-1, the lone person at the Washington Post-owned Slate who says that he or she will vote for McCain is in Ohio. So I'm sure it's an important state for McCain. So I'm sure he's very happy to have that.
I think if you infer from that the Washington Post per se is a lefty outfit, I've got a lot of editorials I would like to show you having to do with foreign policy, but I won't get into that.
I'm simply saying that the Washington Post in this case owns a journal of opinion, and they do. And although I do think that, now tell me, you may know more about this, but Slate people seem to have kind of an inside track to the Outlook section, for example. They have I believe, a section that said "from the pages of Slate" or something like that. I don't want to misstate anything, but I do believe that we see Slate contributors in the Post more frequently than we would see them if the Post did not own Slate. So I think that does exist.
That might exist, and it may counterbalance Fred Hyatt, but I'm not sure. Anyway, another day we'll have that argument.
On the issue of bias, first of all, we have these academic studies, and we have this one that came out last week by the Pew Center for Excellence in Journalism. And this latest one measured negative, neutral, and positive stories about Obama and McCain, I believe, in the period since the convention, so over more than a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they found for Obama negative, positive, neutral stories were about a third, except that the positive stories outnumbered the negative stories. It wasn't exactly equal, and he netted positive. And I believe that they found for McCain, basically it was a third neutral, and then close to two-thirds negative, and then an itty-bitty number of positive stories. So they've now. I don't know how they quantify this. I've never gone deep into the weeds of one of these stories, and looked at the actual story to see how the in this case Pew people tabulated the thing. So I can't speak to that. But anyway, it suggests that. Then you have this new article that's come out in the Politico, in which the two top editors, John Harris and Jim Vandehey, suggest that maybe 80% of the press corps would be favoring Obama, and they do suggest that the coverage seems to be weighted in the direction of positive coverage of Obama, but they say that it is not because of any sort of ideological bias. It's just sort of the way I got the impression that they almost were saying that it's not because of ideological bias. We have a professional responsibility to run with the pack. So there it is.
I don't think they put it quite that way. But
no, they didn't put it. I was paraphrasing. I was characterizing it.
Well, yeah, you said characterize, not caricature, right?
Never.
I think one part of their argument was, first of all, they made an argument, which I think is true, is that a lot of hardcore political reporters, and Politico has a lot of hardcore political reporters, whatever their sympathies, actually are pretty good at viewing things with detachment. That's just a description of political reporters that's actually consistent with my... It has to do with the kind of cynicism they have, I think, ultimately, a lot of hardcore political reporters. I think that's an accurate characterization of a lot of hardcore political reporters. Now, another part of their argument is that, that you report what happens, and more bad things have happened to the McCain campaign, and that accounts for the number of negative stories. They've run into, there have been more cases where he said he didn't remember how many houses he owned, or she had turned out had $150,000 worth of clothes bought for her, blah, 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 than there have been over the last couple of months, bitterly clinging to guns.
Well, let me ask you, for example, when McCain runs an ad saying that Obama favored extending sex education to kindergartners. Is that a bad thing happening to the McCain campaign? You certainly got a lot of negative coverage for it.
Now, you think I'm going to walk into this trap because you think I haven't read the article you wrote about this, right, Byron?
Well, I was trying, but that's very
nice
good.
Try, buddy.
I'm glad to see you've been reading the pages of NRO. But anyway, is that a bad thing that happened to McCain? It wasn't really.
I'll tell you. No, you wrote this piece that made the case that the McCain's depiction of that vote was not as dishonest as the MSM was assuming. And it seemed to me after reading your article,
accurate, actually.
What's that?
I used the word accurate, but
yeah, well, I can't go that far. Sorry.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, it seemed to me after reading your article that there was something to. It seemed to me, so far as I could tell, there was something to your argument. It did not get widely picked up in the MSM. Your argument, so far as I could tell, and I actually don't deny that beyond the fact that there's been a lot of bad stuff actually has happened in the McCain campaign, and there's been more internal disarray maybe and so on. I do think there's something, I would not say that there's been completely unbiased coverage. Let me go that far. And I have a two-factor theory.
Okay, I'm writing that down. I would not say there's been completely unbiased coverage. Signed, Bob Wright. Okay, good.
I have a two-factor theory. Theory as to why that is. And the first factor is this. At the convention, Sarah Palin declared war on the media, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, she said, there's the real America, and then there's the evil media that's going to try to warp the real America's perception of what's going on. I'm around. And I thought, it seems to me that if the media really is powerful, you're kind of playing with fire there. Now,
right.
it could work out.
Don't make them mad.
Well, yeah, look, they're human beings. This is the real world. Mm-hmm. And now it could work out that turns out to be successful working of the refs, right? Where the media goes, oh, we don't want to provide evidence for her thesis, so we'll bend over backwards to cover her even-handed. That could have happened. I don't think it did, and I think one reason it didn't is because a lot of media people felt correctly that John McCain has had the press eating out of his hand for most of his political career. And the idea that now that McCain was going to turn on them and declare them the enemy just really annoyed them,
Right.
And I think that is a significant factor. And I think there's one other. I think there's one other factor. And here, I think whatever you think of that reaction, I don't necessarily applaud that reaction on the part of the media at all. I just think it's kind of predictable. It's kind of the way human nature played out in a not totally unpredictable fashion, and maybe she shouldn't have put things that way at the convention. But the second source of what you're calling media bias, I actually would applaud, and this is where I'm sure you and I are going to disagree. I think people have concluded that I think a lot of people in the media have increasingly concluded that McCain is running one of the more dishonest campaigns in electoral history, and in some respects, a particularly pernicious form of dishonesty has shaped the campaign. And there I'm talking about equating Obama with terrorists in a way that, well, we can argue about that, and we probably will, whether you think that's dishonest. But I think, if you ask me, I mean, and here we get, this gets into a philosophical view of democracy. I mean, you would agree there's never been a pure form of democracy. There are always disproportionately influential people in a democracy.
We're starting with the basics, yes, I would.
We call them elites, right? They're well-educated or rich. They're in journalism. They're in academia. We call them, sociologists call them elites. It's not a disparaging term. It's an analytical term in sociology. Sometimes, there is a view that sometimes when they see things seriously, in their judgment going awry, they should step in and kind of say what they think is right, right? They should, try to see that right as they see it is served. And I think a number of people have concluded that this stuff of equating Obama with terrorism is the closest thing we've seen to McCarthyism from a major presidential candidate Well, not since the 50s, but maybe ever since. In the 50s, there were no major presidential candidates practicing McCarthyism, really. Mm-hmm. Eisenhower wasn't on board for that. And they have gotten a little bee in their bonnet about it. And I think that has happened, and I frankly think it's good, because I do think this part of McCain's campaign is despicable, and I'm sure that's where we may disagree. So take the floor.
Well, I'm going to address a few of these, but my one itty-bitty question is, would it have been better if McCain had referred to Obama palling around or his associations with a radical bomber and not used the word terrorist? Would that have reduced some of your disgust at this?
A tiny bit of it, because here's the problem I have with this whole approach on the part of McCain.
It's the T word that's the big problem?
Well, yeah, precisely because the people they're trying to reach are going to misunderstand the meaning of that, right? I mean, look, in the closing days of a campaign, the people who haven't made up their mind are, let's face it, not terribly well-informed people by and large. And you do a robocall with those people and use the word terrorist, you know that many of them are going to think, oh, that means like Osama bin Laden, and you know that it's your intention to get them to think that, and you know that's not true. Mm-hmm. And I think depicting someone as an enemy of the state on the basis of, intentionally misleading evidence is really despicable.
Okay, what I'm going to do actually is go back to the first part of the don't make them mad part of your theory, mm-hmm. which I thought was interesting. I'm just going to bring up one thing that actually I think supports it does not make the press look very good, but supports what you're saying. The New Yorker held a panel discussion on October 4 in New York about coverage, and Bill Keller, executive editor of the New York Times, was on the panel. And as you know, the Times got a lot of grief for its front page story they published alleging that McCain had had an affair, which wasn't based on very much. And they would later publish, recently, a front page story about Cindy McCain that didn't seem to have a lot to it, alleging that in 1982, a bunch of snooty congressional wives didn't want to sit with Cindy McCain at a luncheon when she had first arrived in Washington. I think that was their opening anecdote. And other news flashes. We also found out that for the story, a Times reporter, Jody Cantor, had contacted friends of McCain's teenage daughter, Bridget, saying, hi, on Facebook, hi, I'm a reporter from the Times, and we're trying to find out what Cindy McCain is like as a mom. So we find out all this. But anyway, at this New Yorker conference, Keller is asked what his reaction is when the McCain campaign complains to the Times of biased coverage. And he said, quote, my first tendency when they do that is to find the toughest McCain story we've got and put it on the front page just to show them they can't get away with it. So I guess that confirms what you're saying, that it's a bad idea to complain about media bias, because they'll just hit you harder just to show you that you can't get away with it.
Now, that's a Bill Keller quote?
That is a Bill Keller quote. By the way, that entire conference is on the web video, and I would urge people to go look at it. I'm saying this from memory, but I think the quote that I gave is about 42 minutes in. But anyway, it's very interesting. Now, let me give you another. I'll give you my two pet peeves of media bias that are just actual stories that just have been a bee in my bonnet since then. You may remember in March there was a certain amount of coverage devoted to Reverend Wright saying "Goddamn America." We had this videotape of him saying that in a sermon in Obama's church. I do recall that.
There
was a little bit of coverage. Mm-hmm. But I will say that if you were a person who only got his or her news from reading the news pages of the New York Times, you would never know that he had said such a thing.
Oh, come on. That had to be in the Times, Byron. That was everywhere.
I will tell you, I will invite you and our viewers, our legions of viewers, to check this out.
So if we search Jeremiah Wright and Goddamn America in the New York Times website, we'll find nothing? Well,
on Nexus, the website, maybe they mentioned it on the web or something. But it first appeared in a column by Bill Kristol on March 17, Maureen Dowd mentioned it in her column on March 23. It appeared in an editorial on April 26. I believe, I shouldn't swear to this, but I think it was an editorial denouncing negative ads by Republicans. It had appeared in a column by the Public Editor and also in a Week in Review article on May 4th, both on the same day. And as far as the news pages of the Times, it first appeared in a story that was published in the Times on September 24. That is not too long ago.
Now, that's the quote itself. You're sure there's no paraphrasal or reference to the controversy prior to that?
Oh, there was reference to the controversy over his quotes, of what he said, of course.
Okay.
I mean, Obama had to give a speech in Philadelphia on March 18
Well,
because of the controversy, so they certainly did. But I think the real driver of the controversy was seeing or reading Reverend Wright saying, no, God damn America. And the Times simply didn't report it. Now, I'm going to give you in its news pages, until September 24. Now, I will give you another example.
Well, of course, one problem you face is you're actually not talking to someone who's insisting that media coverage has been totally even-handed.
I understand that. But I want this. You have to understand. This is a pet peeve, and I am.
I know. I'm happy to help you get this out of your system. I'm here to help. Let it out, Byron.
Where can I dispense with my pet peeves, other than blogging heads?
That's what we're here for.
Okay. The other pet peeve is, it's a common practice in politics for the presidential or vice presidential candidate to release his tax returns. And the story is always pretty pro forma. You report what they made, what their sources of income were, and you usually include something about their donations to charity. And in several weeks ago, Joseph Biden released his tax returns. And the Washington Post did a story, I believe it was on A3, about the tax returns, saying how much he had made. He released 10 years of tax returns, 96 through 07. That would be more than 10 years, I guess, maybe 98 through 07, something like that. And the story had a few paragraphs on that and devoted most of the story to the fact that the Obama campaign was releasing these tax returns in an effort to pressure Sarah Palin to release her tax returns, whereupon we would learn whether she had counted as income the per diem payments she got from the state for her travels, which had been a story in the Post a few days earlier. And there was no mention in the story at all of Biden's contributions to charity. When you look at the returns, the contributions to charity are interesting. In 1998, for example, the Bidens had an adjusted gross income of $210,000, and they reported giving a total of $120 to charity. In 2005, they had an adjusted gross income of $321,000, and they gave $380 to charity. In fact, of 9 of the 10 years involved, out of income that adjusted gross incomes that range from $210,000 to over $300,000, they never gave more than $380 to charity. And then the 10th year, with a gross income of $319,000, they gave $995 to charity. These are far, far below the American averages as percentage of income for charitable giving. It was newsworthy, and this is my pet peeve in the Washington Post. It is, I think, an example of just an astonishing blind spot in not reporting what I think most people would view as not flattering news about a part of the Democratic ticket. So there you go. Those are my 2 pet peeves, actual complaints about actual stories and media bias.
And you feel better now that you've told me about those. I helped you get those out of your system, right?
I do feel better, and now I think all of our viewers have now clicked away to something more interesting. But maybe they can come back now.
Not all of them.
Maybe they can come back.
We have an ideologically diverse viewership, but I'm glad I was able to give you therapy. You will be getting a bill. This is our new business model at Blogging Heads.
Well, I can't go to Fox or NBC and just demand 10 minutes of time to rant about my story. So here I am.
Speaking of Fox, do you want the killer reply to your long brief on media bias?
Very, very good.
You know the audio clip that you want to get out there, that kind of difficult to hear, actually, clip of Obama saying bitterly claim to guns and religion, you know?
Yes.
You know where I heard that this morning? What network I heard it on? And now you guess Fox, okay? And I'll say wrong.
Okay, Fox.
Wrong.
Wrong. What'd you hear?
NPR. Byron York. NPR.
Well, if my tax dollars are going to NPR, I'm so glad to see additional balance coming out of it. So now NPR, we should say, I believe, and we probably shouldn't go too far down this road, but I think is a separate thing because of the government subsidy involved through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So I think it's completely different from Fox or MSNBC, CNN, or the broadcast networks. I put it in a different category because of that.
An asterisk in your indictment.
An asterisk
goes to NPR.
Yes.
So but what about my claim that elites are doing what elites are supposed to do in any society, which is when they see a particularly scurrilous, destructive, pernicious kind of attack, in this case, dishonestly depicting Obama as a friend of terrorists everywhere, implicitly, I think,
right.
and purposefully, that it's okay if they step in and make things very clear and refuse to kind of take the bait.
Step in and use
their
special access to the means of communication as elites to do this. Well, look, we just talked about a while back about this McCain ad about sex education, which was roundly denounced, mostly by elites on television, on the internet, and newspapers. And they stepped in to call it like they saw it. I'm not suggesting they didn't believe that the ad was absolutely outrageous. I'm sure they felt that, but there was an entirely different point of view as well. And if you read the actual legislation involved, talked to sponsors, only one of the 5 sponsors, by the way, would actually talk to me, but you'd have a different picture. It might not be the opposite picture, but it would be a more balanced picture. So I think that elites probably should be bound to try to do a fairer, and here it is, fair and balanced approach to that. So I think that I'm not sure the elite's job is simply to call them as they see them, because a lot of them tend to see it the same way.
Well, tell me this: those robocalls linking Obama to terrorists. Do you think they're reprehensible? You personally, do you think they're reprehensible or even bad yourself, or do you think they're defensible?
Can you give me in your mind at least, the paraphrase of the text of the robocall that you're referring to?
It's something like, you should know that Barack Obama has been, it says at least the following, has been associated with a domestic terrorist, Bill Ayers, who did such and such and such and such. And I submit to you that at this point in the election, those people who are still up for being influenced, who haven't made up their minds, an appreciable number of them, when they hear domestic terrorists, they're thinking vaguely Al-Qaeda, it's all a unified terrorist threat. They're thinking, okay, Obama is an enemy of the state, that's what you're saying. I right. submit that to you.
Okay.
But that's what I think the text roughly said.
All right. I would prefer... if they were, I think the more specific the better. I would say Obama has associated with a man who bombed the Pentagon, the Capitol, and dozens of other targets, and whose radical group was responsible for the deaths of law enforcement officers. I think that would be fine.
Well, of course, first of all, I would say, if all you need is association... God knows McCain has, there's a question of the strength of association, the whole business of guilt of association.
But wait a minute, you wanted me to say what I think would be useful in the robocall.
That's your answer. But you would certainly say it's not even literally accurate for Sarah Palin to say, is, in the present tense, palling around with terrorists. That's not even technically accurate, right?
Well, the palling around remark, I thought, went too far, and I believe they pulled back on that after the first time. Maybe I'm wrong, but, they just... pulled out the palling around line and used associated with or something like that, which is less inflammatory. So I think, though, we should remember that Obama has not been very upfront about the extent of his relationship with Ayers. He has tried to explain it away by saying he was just a guy who lived in the neighborhood. And he was more than that for Obama. And so I think part of Obama's problem in this is the fact that people, and I think even some in the press, suspect that he's simply not been fully forthcoming about his relationship with Ayers, and so that does allow people to ask rhetorical questions. Just how close was he with this domestic terrorist or something like that, in part because he's just never really said. And you have this weird situation in Chicago that many people like me who do not live in Chicago find hard to understand, in which Ayers and Bernardine Dorn have entered the establishment. I'll make an appeal now to our viewers. Are there other former members of the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list who are in positions of such respect today? There may be somebody who's obvious I'm not thinking about. But anyway, people don't really understand or find odd the situation that exists in Chicago that Ayers, Dorn, Mayor Daley, and Obama were part of.
Yeah, but it's... Yeah. Well, it's funny the way rehabilitation works, because first of all, I'd say, as far as association, look, if you're in politics, you go to a lot of events at a lot of people's houses, you serve on a lot of boards, there's a whole lot of people you've associated with. Now, ideally, you would vet them all and so on, but it's not clear to me that his association with Ayers goes much beyond that fact of kind of political life. But I actually had an experience that I think kind of speaks to this. There's a conference at the University of Colorado called the Conference on World Affairs, and I went a few years in a row. And what they do there is they put you up in the houses of kind of relatively affluent people. So 2 or 3 of the guests who are going to be on panel discussions, like me, are being put up in a house. And I'm ashamed to say that I can't quite remember if this was Bernadette Dorn in the house with me. I'm almost sure it was, but this was like, 10 years ago. I wasn't that politically conscious. I knew she was like a major weather woman, I think the major weather woman, okay?
Right.
And it's like they introduced me. I said, hi. I don't remember if we had dinner with the family. Certainly if they had said, you're supposed to be on a panel discussion with her, I would have been polite to her. What went through my head is like, wow, yeah, I remember the 60s, really freaky. People did weird stuff. I assume she's been rehabilitated. I don't know. I mean, she's here at this, that's kind of the way it works, right?
So
you're like at a university or something, and you shake somebody's hand, and
Bob,
yeah.
Let's get the headline here. The headline here is Bob Wright has slept in the same house with
a terrorist.
With a domestic terrorist.
He thinks, but he's,
and he doesn't even remember.
With enough terrorists, you can't really remember the specifics.
Right.
Well,
look, I think on the Dorn and Ayers thing is that I don't think, and Obama did, I think, after McCain finally brought the Ayers things up, I think Obama said something to the effect that he thought that Ayers had been rehabilitated. I think that's certainly an open question. Certainly, Ayers didn't do any time and was not punished by the criminal justice system because of it was all thrown out because of prosecutorial misconduct.
But it went through the criminal justice system, strictly speaking, and there was an outcome that was technically deemed just.
It went through and it was thrown out. But listen, I don't think many people would argue that Ayers is not terribly repentant, at least in public, is not repentant at all, and that it seems to me that he's continuing the revolution by other means. I'm not suggesting that he's out there setting bombs today.
Yep.
But this is, I think, a perfectly legitimate issue for McCain to raise. You can argue a lot about whether it's effective, whether it's having any traction, or whether it's even backfiring on McCain. But in terms of legitimacy of it, it's okay.
My argument is that it's effective only to the extent that the actual facts are misconstrued by people, and McCain knows damn well that that's the only way it's going to work, and he's still putting it out there. And it's the most pernicious kind of mischaracterization of another politician is that they are literally enemies of the state. That's the message he once received, and he is seriously undermining the ability of Barack Obama, if Obama's elected president, to lead a united America. And I think it's totally despicable and reprehensible.
And to answer your concerns, I would simply suggest that McCain change the wording of Ayers from domestic terrorist to someone who bombed the Pentagon, the White House, dozens of other targets, and whose groups was responsible for the death of law enforcement officers. I'm perfectly fine with that.
There's a reason he doesn't do that, Byron, because then the message would be less likely to be misunderstood, and he wants it to be misunderstood.
All right. Well,
now
what have we accomplished in this, huh?
Well, I think I actually think the anecdote about me and Bernadette Dorn was pretty interesting.
You know something? I have to say, I don't want to be one of these real sticklers here, but it's Bernadine Dorn, isn't it?
Bernadine Dorn?
Yeah. I think you're calling her Bernadette Dorn. And so you can't even remember the name of somebody who was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. When you have slept with as many terrorists as I've slept with, they just blur together, Byron. I'm telling you. This is outrageous. I know you with your gift for publicity and promotion. I'm sure this is going to be all over. It's going to be on Memorandum. It's going to be all over the internet very, very soon. The Blogging Heads publicity apparatus is just now shifting into first. Can I quickly tap your political expertise to explain a couple things I don't understand? I know you got to run in a minute, right? To the degree that I have any. Okay. Here's the Joe the Plumber thing. Yeah. Naively, I would have thought that once it came out that whatever, forget whether he's got a license, whatever, that for this particular plumber, right now, the Obama tax plan would mean a tax cut. I would have thought that the McCain people would just quit pushing that. Now, I don't know if it's worked, but they just pushed the hell out of it, notwithstanding the fact that actually in real time right now, this guy would get a tax cut, this plumber would get a tax cut. Right. What's the logic, and has it worked? I don't get it. Well, for one, maybe they have made too much of it. I can't say on that. Their thinking is that you need to go back to what I was saying much earlier in this conversation, which is they're trying to appeal to the people who don't believe Obama. They don't believe his promises when he says it's just going to be people over $250,000. So Joe is good for that, and he is also good just on the general issue of taxes. And I think the McCain people felt when Obama said, when you spread the wealth around, it's better for everybody. I think that they felt they had that from Obama's mouth, tagging himself as an old-style redistributionist liberal Democrat. And they're going to beat it as much as they can. I think it's their use of the word socialism, I think, is a little odd, and we could do a whole segment on that. So the word itself seems almost quaint, and I think Rush Limbaugh a couple of days ago wondered whether it was a good word to use in the sense that a lot of the voting population really just doesn't even know much about it. At this point, the undecideds are probably thinking, yeah, I like socializing, I do it on Facebook, and MySpace, but the idea of using it to tag Obama as this sort of redistributionist liberal, I think, was very appealing to them, and they think that Joe was a quick shorthand way to do that. Yeah, which leads to my next question. It seems to me spread the wealth is just not a phrase that strikes a lot of people as unappealing, and this was commented on after the debate, but he kept using that. Now finally he seems to be shifting a little more toward he would redistribute income, but I'll tell you, in the current economic climate, I'm not sure that's a loser. Remember we're not in a Great Depression, but remember what politics ensued after the Great Depression, right? You wound up with high-end tax rates of 70% or something. I don't get. It seems to me in some ways McCain is just a little more tone deaf than I would have imagined. I agree with, spread the wealth is, I'm not sure what effect that actual three-word phrase has on people. I know that on the stump, both McCain and Palin are making it clearer. Palin yesterday is basically saying, look, they're going to take your money and they're going to give it to other people. That's what they're going to do. You work hard for your money. Other people don't work as hard, and they're going to take it from you and give it to them. Now, that is an argument of long standing in American politics, and this is all a matter of degree, because obviously the government exists in some large part to redistribute income. It's doing it as we speak. But they're basically saying, you think it's bad now, Obama's going to do more of it. And I don't know how widespread that appeal is going to be, but that's the case they're making at every stump speech these days. Okay. If you have time for one more question. I'm exhausted, and I still have to drive to a Palin rally, but that's okay. With the new technology, you can sleep while you drive. Okay. I am too superstitious to assume that Obama will win, but
That's one of two scenarios. If he does, and
So
Palin,
are you predicting a McCain victory right here as we speak? That's another headline.
well, I'm so superstitious. I did bet on McCain back when I thought I got 2-to-1 odds back when I thought his chances were being underestimated. But anyway, if Obama wins and Palin indeed emerges as the leader and runs in 4 years, what kind of Republican Party will that be? What kind of coalition can she assemble? Can she be the head of a viable, winning Republican coalition?
Yeah, well,
it's got to have something other than the Christian right. What will cling to her 4 years from now that would permit victory?
Right. Now that is a huge question, and I don't know the answer to it except to say that her emergence or her being able to last is not a foregone conclusion at all. Obviously, what you're going to see if Obama wins and the Republicans are shut out of the White House, the House, and the Senate, you're going to see a lot of the stages of grief, recrimination, self-examination. What kind of party are we? You're going to see all this kind of thinking on the part of Republicans and conservatives. Now, Palin will be part of that, but it's just not clear to me, how big a part of it she will be. And there's certainly some Republicans who already blame her for McCain's troubles. They don't actually blame her. They think McCain made a bad choice, so they ultimately blame McCain. But this is something that you're going to see a lot, and I don't think it's a foregone conclusion at all that in the event of a McCain defeat that Palin would emerge as the favorite or the leader of the party after that.
Yeah. No, I mean, the stories are that's already the positioning. When you read the stories about bitter internal infighting, that's the scenario that she's positioning herself.
That's right.
But lately there's been a wave of stories that there's not so much bitter infighting, so who knows. But anyway, thanks so much, Byron, for filling in the many blank spots in my comprehension of American politics. And you're off to see Sarah?
Chillicothe, Ohio, to see Palin today. So a little more Palin.
Will you give her my best?
I will. And,
okay.
And I'm sure she'll know that. Oh, Bob Wright, not
All you gotta
Nonzero,
do-
that guy.
All you got to do is say, Bob says hello. Believe me, she'll know.
Okay. Good to see you.
Okay, thanks, Byron.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.